I never imagined that the best years of my life could turn into a waking nightmare. When I first stepped foot on campus, I was a hopeful freshman, eager for new experiences. College meant independence, new friends, and endless possibilities. What I didn't expect was receiving a mysterious invitation that would change my life forever. It began on a crisp autumn afternoon at the Student Activities Fair. I was wandering among the crowded booths when I nearly missed a table draped in black in the back corner of the quad. At that table stood an attendant in a neat black suit. He looked out of place among the casually dressed undergrads, tall and composed with a polite but distant air. His dark eyes seemed to lock onto mine the moment I noticed him. Curiosity piqued, I approached. On the table lay only a leather-bound book and an old-fashioned quill pen set in a bottle of red ink. The suited student greeted me with a smooth, confident smile. "Hello, I'm glad you came by," he said smoothly, using my name even though I hadn't told him. I paused, taken aback. He had addressed me by name. How does he know who I am? My heart did a curious little flip between intrigue and caution. "We've had our eye on you," he continued, as if reading my confusion. "You're exactly the kind of person who could benefit from our organization." A dozen questions fluttered through my mind. He spoke with a gravity that made me stand a little straighter, as if I were already being evaluated somehow. "What organization?" I managed, glancing at the bare table for clues. There was no banner or sign, nothing at all to identify who they were. The young man rested a hand on the leather book, drawing my attention to a symbol embossed in gold on its cover, a circle enclosing an intricate geometric pattern. It looked like something from an ancient manuscript. "We are a very private society," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper, despite the bustle around us. "One that values scholarship, discretion, and mutual advancement. Membership is by invitation only." He lightly tapped the quill against the ink bottle, and I noticed the liquid inside was a deep crimson, rather than the usual black. A faint warning rang in the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by the flattery and excitement I felt. They had noticed me. The idea of being singled out, of someone seeing potential in me, was intoxicating. "What would I have to do?" I asked, trying to sound composed even as my stomach fluttered. He smiled a bit wider. "Tonight, after midnight, come to the old Humanities building, 3rd floor, room 333. The door will be open. Bring this card." From inside the book, he produced a small black envelope, sealed with red wax bearing that same circle emblem, and handed it to me. Before I could ask anything else, he inclined his head in a polite goodbye and turned to greet another student who had wandered over, effectively ending our conversation as abruptly as it began. I walked away, clutching the envelope, my heart thudding with a mix of nerves and excitement, alone in my dorm room. Later, I broke the red wax seal and pulled out a heavy cream-colored card. In elegant cursive, it said, "If you seek knowledge and belonging, join us at the stroke of midnight, room 333, Humanities Hall. Tell no one." For all I knew, it was an honor society with a flair for drama. The thought of special networks and opportunities dazzled me enough to override my hesitation. I had been feeling lost. In my first weeks on campus, I hadn't really connected with anyone or anything. Maybe this was where I belonged. By 11:45 p.m., I had made up my mind. I slipped out of my dorm into the chilly October night the invitation card tucked in my jacket pocket like a talisman. The campus was quiet at that hour. Pathways empty under the nearly full moon, peeking through thin clouds. The old humanities building loomed ahead, ivy crawling up its stone walls and narrow windows like watchful eyes. I remembered it had a bit of a haunted reputation among upperclassmen, which made me swallow hard. Still, I pressed on. To my relief, the main door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The hallways were dark and silent, carrying only the faint scent of dust and old wood. I climbed the creaky stairs to the third floor. The corridor was deserted and dim, lined with classroom doors, lost in shadow. At the far end, light seeped from a doorway. Room 333. My mouth went dry, and I hesitated just outside the threshold. A wave of second thoughts nearly stopped me. This felt undeniably wrong. But I'd come this far, drawn by the promise of something bigger than myself. Gathering every ounce of nerve, I gently pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of melting wax and something metallic. Like copper, the room was lit by dozens of candles, perched on tall stands and scattered across a large wooden table in the center. The flames danced and sent long, shifting shadows slithering along the walls and ceiling. About a dozen figures stood in a circle in the middle of the room, all cloaked in black robes with deep hoods obscuring their faces. The only person not hooded was the suited student from the fair. He stood to one side, now clad in a black robe as well, but I recognized his posture and that calm smile. In his hands was the same leather-bound book I'd seen earlier. As I inched forward, every instinct screamed to turn and run. But before I could act, the door closed behind me with a soft click. Someone must have been waiting in the shadows to shut it. My exit was sealed. "Welcome. Initiate," came a woman's voice from within the circle of robed figures. One hooded figure stepped forward and pulled back her hood. By the golden candlelight, I saw an elegant but severe-looking woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s. She had sharp, refined features and eyes that gleamed with authority. A thin scar ran down her left cheek, giving her an austere countenance. "Come, step into the circle," she instructed, heart hammering. I obeyed, moving into the center of their ring. The robed members closed the circle around me. I felt like a lamb surrounded by wolves, predators whose eyes I couldn't even see. "I'm Elena," the woman said. Her scar caught the light, and I found myself fixating on it as if it were easier than meeting her intense gaze. "I preside over our ceremonies, and you are here to prove yourself worthy of the circle." The circle. The word reverberated in my mind. I realized the symbol on the book, a circle within circles, must represent this group. Elena swept her pale hand in a slow gesture to encompass everyone around. "We, who stand here, form the circle, bound by trust, knowledge, and power." At her words, the others spoke in unison, a soft chorus. Bound by blood, bound by secrecy, bound by the secrecy. The synchronization sent a chill down my spine. "Before you commit yourself," Elena continued solemnly, "know that there is no turning back after tonight. To join us is to become part of something far greater than any college club or society. Ours is an ancient fellowship. Do you believe you have the courage and dedication for this?" My throat tightened. I could barely croak the words. "I think so." Elena nodded slightly. The young man with the book stepped forward now and opened it to a marked page, offering the book and quill pen to Elena. She took them, then reached into a pocket of her robe and produced a small, ornately curved knife. Without warning, she grabbed my right hand. I flinched, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She pressed the tip of the blade into my index finger. I gasped as a bead of blood welled up. Elena held the quill to my finger. The quill's tip eagerly drank up the drop of blood like a thirsty tongue. My head buzzed with a mix of fear and a strange, dizzy excitement. Elena handed me the quill and positioned the open book in front of me. The pages were yellowed parchment, filled with rows of names, written in elegant script. Some looked centuries old. A blank line awaited my signature. "Sign your name in the book," Elena said, her voice almost gentle now. I stared at the quill in my hand, the tip glistening with my own blood. My vision blurred for a moment. Was I really about to do this? Sign my name in blood into some secret book? It was insane, and yet the expectant hush of the room pressed in on me. I felt dozens of hidden eyes watching from within those hoods. My hand trembled as I lowered the quill and scrawled my name on the blank line. The blood, ink, came out a stark crimson against the old paper. For a second, I forgot to breathe. Elena inspected my shaky signature and smiled. "Welcome to the circle," she said softly. A few of the others whispered welcome as well, a faint susurration around me. Elena continued, her tone turning firm. "Now that you are one of us, you must understand our laws. The circle has 3 sacred rules, and you will obey them without exception." She raised one finger. "First, never speak of what happens in the circle to anyone outside it. Our secrecy is our strength. Break this rule, and the consequences will be dire." A second finger. "Second, never question the commands given to you by the circle's leaders. You are expected to trust our purpose, even if you do not fully understand it. We all follow the chain of command here." A third finger. "Third, never refuse a task given to you by the circle. We all must play our part. Hesitation or defiance will not be tolerated." As I nodded shakily to each rule, Elena had me repeat a solemn oath, phrase by phrase, swearing on my blood and soul to uphold the circle's 3 sacred rules. I vowed to keep its secrets, to obey its leaders, and to never refuse a task given to me. I ended the oath by binding myself now and for all time to the circle, and the others echoed those final words in unison, sealing the pledge. "It is done," Elena proclaimed. A collective exhalation seemed to pass through the circle. I realized I had been holding my own breath. Several members stepped forward to pat my shoulder or give a brief, congratulatory nod. The circle broke apart slightly, the formality giving way to an almost casual atmosphere. I forced a weak smile, trying to process the flood of adrenaline and relief coursing through me. Nothing immediately terrible had happened. It had all been ritual and words, and a little blood. Maybe this really was just an eccentric fraternity after all, with dramatic initiation traditions. As the gathering fell silent, the man with the book, my initial recruiter, approached and gave me a slight nod. "I'm Marcus," he introduced himself quietly, perhaps noticing my dazed look. "You'll be all right. Get some rest and watch your email for further instructions." I nodded numbly, grateful for the reassurance from at least one friendly voice. Elena fixed me with a final stern look. as another member led me toward the door. "And remember the rules," she said softly, her eyes bored into mine. "We are always watching." That parting warning sent a chill through my blood. A moment later, I was out in the third-floor hallway again, the heavy door thudding shut behind me. I hurried down the stairs and out into the cool night air. I hadn't realized I was trembling until I saw my hands shaking in the moonlight. The old building loomed behind me, its dark windows like blank eyes. I had the crawling sensation that somewhere in one of those windows, someone stood silently watching me leave. Clutching the small bandage one of them had wrapped around my pricked finger, I walked briskly back toward my dorm. My mind was racing with questions. What exactly have I joined? Was this a cult? Yet, mixed with the fear was a twisted thrill. I had been accepted into something secret and important. That thought warred with my anxiety all the way home. In my room, my roommate was asleep, oblivious to the fact that my life had irreversibly changed in the last hour. I slid under my covers, adrenaline still thrumming in my veins. In bed, the ceremony replayed in my head on a relentless loop. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake at the slightest creak or flicker of shadow. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion finally claimed me, and the last thing echoing in my mind was that final chant, "Bound by the circle." Over the next few weeks, my life split in two. By day, I was an ordinary student attending classes and grabbing lunch in the dining hall. By night, I was an acolyte of the circle, slipping away to midnight meetings and carrying out secret errands. The society tested my obedience with a series of bizarre tasks. In one instance, I was ordered to retrieve an artifact from a crypt in the local cemetery. At midnight, I pried a stone amulet from an old mausoleum. The moment I touched it, an icy shock ran up my arm, and I thought I heard a whisper behind me. I ran from that tomb and delivered the amulet to a waiting member without a word. Other nights, I delivered sealed packages to unknown recipients, or stood watch in remote corners of campus for reasons never explained. Whatever the circle demanded, I did. With each task I carried out, the chains binding me pulled tighter. I barely slept on the nights between meetings. When I did, my dreams were plagued by chanting figures and bloody scenes under moonlight. More than once I jolted awake, certain I heard a whisper in my room or saw a silhouette in the corner, only to find nothing there. My paranoia grew. Even in daylight, I felt invisible eyes watching me, and I caught myself glancing over my shoulder whenever I walked across campus. I started distancing myself from friends, afraid I might blurt out something, or that the circle might harm anyone who got too close to me. I was living in a constant state of quiet panic, waiting for whatever test would come next. About a month into my membership, an email arrived with instructions for a special gathering off campus. It specified a remote location, deep in the woods, beyond the university's arboretum, and warned that this ritual would be a test of devotion. It also ominously mentioned we must come prepared for a sacrifice to appease the Old One. My hands trembled as I read those words. Sacrifice. The Old One. Any hopes I had that this was all just theatrics were fading fast. That night, I found myself trudging through the woods with the others, our flashlights bobbing as we followed a narrow trail to a clearing beneath a moonless sky. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting weak yellow halos over a large symbol drawn on the forest clearing's dirt floor. It was the same circle. Inside, a circle emblem, rendered on the ground in what looked like white chalk or salt. 4 tall black candles stood at the cardinal points of the circle, their flames wavering in the slight breeze. In the very center, tethered to a wooden stake with a short rope, was a young goat. The goat let out a nervous bleat as we formed a ring around it. I felt sick when I saw the glint of the ritual knife in Elena's hand. This was really happening. An animal sacrifice. My stomach churned, and I reflexively took a half-step back. But Marcus was right beside me and gently gripped my elbow, keeping me in place. His face was grim beneath the hood of his robe. The ritual began with low, rhythmic chanting in that same strange language they had used in my initiation oath. The volume and intensity rose with each verse, the group's voices converging into a droning harmony that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The night air grew unnaturally still, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. At the chant's peak, Elena stepped forward and handed the knife to a tall, hooded man. In one swift motion, he drew the blade across the goat's throat. The animal's scream rang out, high, pitched and horrendous, and then gurgled as a stream of dark blood gushed onto the patterned soil. I clapped a hand over my mouth, eyes stinging with tears at the sudden cruelty of it. By lantern light, each member anointed their forehead with the goat's blood. When my turn came, I hesitated, but under Elena's unforgiving stare, I let her paint a warm, wet line on my brow. I shuddered as the coppery stench filled my nose. As the final verse of the chant reverberated through the trees, a sudden hiss of wind whipped through the clearing, extinguishing all the candles at once. The clearing plunged into near total darkness, only the faint glow of our shuttered lanterns remaining. In that darkness, a deep, rumbling growl resonated from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was as if the night itself growled at us. The circle of members around me dropped to their knees. I was so startled that I stumbled and fell to my knees as well. My heart was pounding so hard it might burst. Somewhere in the dark, I swore I heard something. Multiple somethings. Whispering. The language was foreign, twisted, and it came from between the trees, from the air above, from the ground below. I squeezed my eyes shut. Please let this be my imagination, I begged internally. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the wind died. Someone relit a lantern. Then others quickly moved to relight the black candles. In the renewed glow, I saw faces around me streaked with tears and ecstasy. Some were even smiling, as if confirmed in some faith. I wiped at my face and found I had been crying too, though in my case, from pure terror. Elena's face was nearly shining with exhilaration. Blood smeared across her cheeks like war paint. "The Old One hears us," she announced breathlessly. "It is pleased." A murmur of relief rippled through the group. I felt like I might vomit. We had just slaughtered a living creature and... what? Apparently something responded out of the darkness. I didn't see it fully, but I felt it, and that was enough to break whatever remained of my curiosity. I wanted out. I wanted out now. Back in my dorm room in the early hours of morning, I scrubbed at my forehead until my skin was raw. It still felt like a film of warmth and coppery scent clung to me. I knew now that the circle's rituals were not just empty. Theatrical gestures were not just empty theatrical gestures. They were real. They were dangerous. We had called out into the void of the night, and something had answered. I barely slept at all after that. I lay in bed, shaking, replaying the horrific scene in the forest on an endless loop. I thought about going to the campus police, or the administration, or even the local news. Someone who could intervene, but who would ever believe such a story? And even if someone did, I had no proof, except a scar on my finger and trauma in my eyes. Plus, I remembered Elena's warning about breaking the vow of secrecy. The look in her eyes, when she spoke of dire consequences, left little doubt that the Circle would retaliate in ways far worse than expulsion. They had no qualms about killing a goat. Would a dissident member be treated any better? I suspected not. The next day, in a moment of desperate weakness, I almost broke rule number 1. My roommate found me huddled at my desk, looking like death, and asked if I was okay. I nearly told him everything. I was on the verge of spilling out the whole story. Cult rituals, sacrifices, all of it. Rules be damned. But as I started to speak, something caught my eye through our window. Across the quad, partly hidden behind a tree, stood a dark figure. He was far away, but I knew that stance. It was Marcus. He was Marcus. He was watching me. Maybe he was merely out for a walk, but in that instant I felt sure he was there to keep tabs on me. Our eyes met across the distance. My blood ran cold. I forced a laugh and pretended I'd been joking about whatever I'd almost said. My roommate just gave me a weird look as I quickly excused myself. That was the moment I fully understood. I was trapped. The Circle was never going to let me just walk away. They were always watching. I had no idea how many of them were scattered around campus, blending in as normal students, keeping an eye on their recruits. I felt truly alone, ensnared in a tightening web of secrecy and fear. A few days later, a girl from campus went missing. The moment I heard the news, I felt sick with dread. In my gut, I knew the Circle was involved. That same night, an encrypted email summoned all members to a grand convergence beneath the old chapel at midnight. My hands shook as I read the details. We were to meet in the closed, off-campus chapel, which had been under renovation for years, and gather in its crypt. I knew we were about to do something unspeakable. At the stroke of midnight, I slipped into the abandoned chapel with the others. Elena unlocked a padlock on a heavy wooden door, and we descended a spiral stone stairway into the earth. The air grew damp and cold as we wound down into what looked like a forgotten crypt. At last we emerged into a circular chamber lit by sputtering torches, set in iron sconces. The walls were carved with strange runes that writhed in the flickering light. In the center of the chamber stood a large stone altar, and on it lay the missing girl. She was alive, bound hand and foot with ropes and gagged with a strip of cloth. Her eyes were wild and shining with tears above the gag. She thrashed against her bonds as we formed a circle around the altar. I felt my knees go weak. This was far worse than anything I'd feared. "Brothers and sisters," Elena intoned, raising the ritual dagger high. "The hour is come. The hour is come. The old one shall rise tonight, and we shall honor our pact." 2 members seized me by the arms and pushed me forward toward the altar. I staggered, coming to stand right beside the terrified bound girl. I could hear her frantic breaths through her nose, see the desperate, pleading look in her eyes. She was trying to scream through the gag, a wet, panicked sound. "No, no, please," I whimpered, instinctively trying to back away. The members beside me tightened their grip on my arms like iron vises. Elena stepped up and placed the dagger into my hand. My fingers were so slick with sweat, I almost dropped it. She kept her hand over mine, steadying the blade and angling it downward toward the girl's chest. Elena's lips nearly brushed my ear as she whispered, "Prove your loyalty. Do this, or take her place." I shook my head wildly, tears spilling down my cheeks. I can't," I choked out behind a sob. Across the altar, I caught a glimpse of Marcus's face beneath his hood, ashen, eyes downcast. "Just do it," he mouthed, barely audible. His voice cracked. It'll be over quickly. My entire body was quaking. The girl on the altar bucked and writhed, trying with all her might to free herself. The chanting began around us now, low and dreadful. Elena pressed down with her hand, and I realized that whether I actively participated or not, this blade was coming down. My choice was to either take control or merely be an instrument in her hands. Some primal survival instinct took over. In a blur of tears and horror, I drove the dagger downward with all the force I had. It plunged into the girl's chest, sinking to the hilt. Her body jerked against the ropes, a hideous muffled scream tearing from her throat beneath the gag. Hot blood spurted over my hands and flecked my face. I gasped in shock, reflexively yanking the blade out. The girl convulsed, then went horribly still, her life pooling out across the stone. Time froze. I heard the dagger clang to the floor. It must have slipped from my fingers. For a moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing and the drip, drip of blood cascading off the altar. Then all hell broke loose. The blood that had run into the carved channels of the altar began to glow, as if lit from within by a red ember. A low vibration thrummed through the chamber, rattling in my teeth. The torches dimmed, their flames shrinking and quivering. Above the altar, the very shadows coalesced, gathering into a towering column of darkness. 2 pinpoints of burning red light appeared near its top. Eyes, a wave of putrid air, washed over us, reeking of rot and sulfur. I would have gagged if I had any breath in me. A sound came from that darkness, a voice that wasn't a voice, deep and ancient, speaking directly inside my head. I am here. The words fell like lead in my mind, filled with contempt and hunger. I collapsed to the ground, clutching my ears, though it did nothing to block out that impossible voice. Around me, the cultists prostrated themselves, pressing their foreheads to the bloody stone floor in reverence. I was too in shock to even consider anything but staring upward. The demon, for what else could it be, extended a limb of pure darkness toward the altar. The girl's lifeless body rose into the air like a rag doll. Then, with a wet crunch, her corpse folded in on itself, bones snapping, flesh compressing. As the entity consumed her, within seconds the body was gone, absorbed into the writhing shadow. The glowing red eyes flared brighter. I felt them fall upon me. In that instant, an agony unlike anything I'd known ignited on my chest. I screamed as an invisible brand seared the circle's circular symbol into my flesh, right above my heart. The pain was blinding. I could smell my own skin burning. In my mind, the terrible voice hissed one final phrase, bound by blood. And then, with a roaring sound like a gust of wind, the towering shadow collapsed into itself and vanished. The torches flared back to life, their flames steady once more. The only evidence of what had transpired was the blood soaking the altar, and the searing pain on my chest. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, Elena slowly rose to her feet, followed by the others. I remained on my knees, swaying, staring at my blood-drenched hands. I think I was in shock. Elena's voice sounded distant, echoing in my ears. It is done. The pact is sealed. Some of the members were sobbing in joy, others chanting soft praises. Marcus gently helped me to my feet. I noticed he was careful not to look at the altar, where a smear of what used to be a person was all that remained. I don't remember leaving that crypt. I vaguely recall stumbling after the group as we ascended the stairs, my legs barely carrying me. I recall the cool pre-dawn breeze on my face outside the chapel, which made me realize I was hyperventilating. Marcus had to half drag, half carry me back to my dorm. I might have been babbling or screaming. I honestly don't know. My next clear memory is of me lying on my dorm room floor, just after sunrise, sobbing uncontrollably into a towel to muffle my sounds. That was 2 days ago. Since then, I've drifted through my routine in a daze, pretending to be normal. Inside, I'm anything but. I see blood on my hands that no amount of scrubbing can clean. There's a raw, circular scar burned into my chest, over my heart. The unmistakable sigil of the circle, like I've been marked as property. Sometimes it aches dully, a physical reminder of the chain that now yokes me to it. Campus police and volunteers continue to search for the missing girl, plastering up flyers with her smiling face. I know they'll never find even a trace of her. There's nothing left to find. I want so badly to tell someone, anyone, what happened, to unload this nightmare and maybe get help. But I'm paralyzed with fear. The circle doesn't even need to threaten me at this point. I can't sleep without seeing those red eyes in the dark. I know deep in my bones that if I betray them, the old one will know. Maybe the circle would hunt me down, or maybe it would in ways no human authority could protect me from. How could I ever be free of something that isn't even truly flesh and blood? Elena and the others treat the scar on my chest like a badge of honor, as if I had been specially chosen. Yet ever since that night, I sometimes feel a tug in my chest, like an invisible chain still linking me to that underground altar. In my nightmares, I hear the old ones whisper. I fear the monster left a piece of itself in me, stoking the dread that keeps me in line. I'm writing this down as my only outlet, though I don't know if I'll ever dare show it to anyone. Maybe it's just to remind myself that it was real, that I haven't just gone mad. If someone ever finds this account, consider it a warning. If you ever receive a mysterious invitation, promising friendship and belonging, run. No secret society is worth the price I've paid. It's late now. The dorm is quiet. But as I finish this, I swear I hear a faint whisper from the corner of my room. It could be just my frayed nerves. Or it could be the old one, watching to make sure I keep its secrets. I'm trapped in this nightmare, bound to the circle, likely for the rest of my life.